Head of Innovation Tax Release here at Fortis. I'm here today to go through the changes to the R&D scheme that HMRC are implementing from the 1st of April this year. The webinar shouldn't take long, probably no more than 30 minutes. It might even be a bit quicker, depending on the questions we get at the end. But please feel free to use the chat pod during the webinar, and we'll try and answer your questions as we go along. If we don't get round, or you've got a question that you'd like to ask us privately, then please email me. I'd be happy to take those on. So the content of the webinar is around the following: what the current situation is in terms of how we currently process and compile your R&D claims, the updates to the R&D legislation from April 1st of this year, some other changes that will affect R&D claims, the new digital submission process, how will it affect you, and the actions that you need to take to make sure that your R&D claim is still viable following these changes. So I've entitled this part Information or Action, and it's a combination of both. We're going to go through some information which hopefully will be of interest, but more importantly, it will demand, and I use the word quite deliberately, it will demand some action on your part. So there is some new information based on HMRC's changes to the scheme, and we'll go through those in a minute. But what we don't want to happen is, following this information, that you end up sleepwalking into your next claim and either end up with a claim that is of less value or a claim that you can't support. There's also an opportunity to increase the value of your R&D claim, and that sort of goes hands in hand with the changes that HMRC are making. And then we'll detail the action that you need to take. So the current situation: HMRC have been revising the scheme over the last 18 months to ensure it's fit for purpose. Now, normally HMRC implement changes over a long period of time, and they're quite slow. Over the last 18 months, we've seen a rapid increase in change brought about by us leaving the EU and HMRC having to spend the R&D tax credit relief out of the UK Treasury, where previously it was paid out of the EU Treasury. And that's just for the SME scheme. The RDEC scheme was always paid out of the UK Treasury. They're also hoping to tackle the vast amount of fraud that takes place in R&D, and they're doing that through a number of measures, which we'll go through later. One of those anti-fraud attempts was last year, and HMRC sent out a letter, and it was we've entitled the one-to-many nudge letters. Around 10,000 letters went out to clients, R&D clients who'd submitted a claim, but it hadn't been processed, and HMRC gave those clients the opportunity to withdraw their claim, or asked that if they wanted HMRC to pursue it, that they had to write in and ask HMRC to continue to process their claim. Well, just on the back of that, a large number of people withdrew their claim. The clients from Fortis that received those letters, we continued to process their claim, and they were paid out with no problems. However, just on that one letter, HMRC saved an awful lot of money, and those people will probably not claim again. With regards to the two schemes that are currently in place, HMRC is pushing for clients or people that are claiming R&D to go for more RDEC scheme claims, because they believe that a lot of work is done on the behalf of clients through a contract, and if that's the case, then it should be under the RDEC scheme. Additionally, HMRC have increased the number of inquiries or compliance checks into claims, and that's not because they believe that they are fraudulent. It's really to ensure that they're not, and as such, the instances of compliance checks have gone up. This again is part of HMRC's ongoing process now to ensure there's less fraud, but also to ensure that those people who are claiming one in the right scheme and that the activities that they're claiming for are eligible. Again, the last point here might resonate with a few people, is that the claims are based on memories of what happened and estimates of people's time and value of expenditure. And we've always been happy to help with regards to what happened in the past. But HMRC are now insisting, as we'll see later, on more accurate records being kept, so that they can, one, if need be, audit those records, but two, make sure that those claims are more accurate. So let's look at some of the updates to the R&D tax release legislation from April the 1st, 2023. Data and cloud computing costs before weren't eligible, but now they've been added to the allowable expenditure. As have advances in pure maths, they'll also be eligible. If you haven't claimed in the last 3 years, you will have to pre-notify HMRC that you intend to claim. Now, I also noticed yesterday in discussion with our tax manager, Kat Hill, there's also a clause in there to say that you have to pre-notify HMRC if you have claimed in the last 3 years, but you've gone 6 months past your accounts date. So again, we'll identify what that means and make sure that all claims are eligible and are notified to HMRC in time anyway. HMRC have also issued a sort of amnesty because they believe that some claims should be RD. So that if a claim has been put into this to HMRC under the SME scheme, they're allowing people to change it back to, or change it to RDEC if they believe it was incorrectly submitted. I can't see many people doing that, but if you do, I'm sure HMRC will be delighted because you'll get less money. However, all the claims that we've made under the SME scheme are correct. And also there's an update to the rate of relief for RDEC and SME, which will apply for expenditure from April the 1st this year. So not any claims prior to that, but only for expenditure after the 1st of April, which we'll go through in a minute. There are some other changes, and these won't apply until the 1st of April next year, 2024. And one of those is tax relief will only be available for subcontracted R&D and EPWs, that's externally employed workers, in the UK. And that's to stop a lot of R&D monies being spent abroad or claimed for money that's been sent abroad to pay people not in the UK. And the idea is that our R&D claim should be based on R&D that took place in this country, and as a result, the money will be spent in this country if it's received by those people. There are one or two exceptions. One of those is that if you can convince HMRC that the R&D couldn't take place in this country because of some sort of constraint. And one of the examples they use is if you're engaged in the study of volcanoes, then clearly we haven't got any active volcanoes in this country, so that may apply. Point 2, more information will be needed when you submit a claim, and that's why we'll cover that in a little bit more detail in a minute, but that involves more record keeping and details of your industry type, as in the SIC code, and some other elements. There's also some preferential rates for R&D intensive SMEs, and those people or those claimants will be more likely to be startups or companies employed in more strategic R&D, like pharmaceutical companies and companies like that. And lastly, number 4, claims will need to be made digitally, which will feature in a later slide, unless the company is exempt from making tax digital. So let's just look at the change in rates. And probably the 2 headline ones here are the SME changes. So here you can see that prior to April 1st, 2023, expenditure for a company in profit in a SME scheme, you probably got about 24,700 for every £100,000 of qualifying expenditure. From this year, from the beginning of this year, that rate of relief will diminish slightly, and it goes down to 21,500. So not really a huge big hit. However, if we look at the advantage, the large scheme or the RDEX scheme, prior to April this year, the relief was 10,500 per 100,000 of qualifying. It will go up to 15,000 tax relief for every 100,000 qualifying expenditure. So HMRC are trying to incentivise the RDEX scheme and encourage claiming there where appropriate. And of course, some claimants might have split claims where they've received maybe some of their work via a contract, or maybe it's been supported by state aid or some sort of grant. So let's just talk about the digital submission process. Historically, we've always submitted, and we will continue to submit our claims via a portal, which includes a technical report and the financial information together with the amended corporation tax forms, the CT 600. From August the 1st of this year, all claims will have to be submitted via the digital submission process. And as a result, there are a large number of boxes that HMRC have put on their online form that needed to be filled in prior to us being able to submit the claim. So one of those is input of the company in the company name, whether you're the agent, as in we're the we do the accounts for our clients, or we're just submitting an R&D claim, what sort of claim type it is in terms of what scheme it's under, the SME scheme, the RDEX scheme, or a mixture, and most importantly for them, the SIC code for your industry. That will quickly identify from the previous bits of information whether you're the type of company that would normally claim R&D, but also are you claiming in it typically in the right scheme, SME or RDEX. Now, additional to that is technical and financial information, and that's normally within the technical report or the financial report that we submit on your behalf. However, HMRC are now asking that all projects and financial data is collected by project. So for each project, you will have to collect information on a contemporaneous way. And we'll go into that in a minute. So how will it affect you? You will have to keep accurate and contemporaneous records. Lovely word, contemporaneous. What it really means is you have to collect them as near to the time of the event as reasonably possible. And once a week will probably be more than enough to do that. If you can collect it on the day, that's fine. But a catch up at the end of the week will be more than, I suggest, will be quite adequate. And that's the technical information, as in what was happening in terms of the R&D and the R&D project, and any money that was spent. And that means people's time allocated to each project, but also any materials. And this is essential information that will have to be used when we enter your claim digitally. And the last point there, unfortunately, I mean, if you haven't got records, we can't do a claim for you. No one, and if anybody says they can, they won't be able to. And the other thing then is if there's no records, there'll be no claim and there's no tax relief. And clearly, we don't want that to happen. Hence, we're running these webinars to inform people. So, what records do you need to keep? And there's an awful lot of information that appears on this slide. But what I would say is, it's all information that should be readily available to you and shouldn't be too difficult. So, typically the name of the project that you're currently working on, the start and finish dates of the project, and what you thought you were advancing in either science or technology, or what you were hoping to achieve in terms of raising the state of science or technology associated with what you were trying to do. Now, if you can't do that, again, it's something we can help with. The scientific details of the scientific or technological uncertainties, in brackets, problems that you were trying to, or you actually did resolve, who was involved in terms of the employees and what they did. You might notice there that point then goes on to say if directly or indirectly, and HMRC differentiate people's involvement, and that's to say that if you were directly involved, you were clearly hands-on. If you were indirectly involved, then you might be, if you like, one level back in a supporting role, like ordering materials, engaging with subcontractors in order to engage them into a contract. It might have been hiring people through HR or something like that. What subcontractors were used and what their involvement was on your project, what externally employed workers were used and their involvement, the time spent by each employee on the project, any materials that were used, destroyed or consumed, and this will, as I've said before, would have to be collected contemporaneously. And weekly will be, I actually think that weekly will be fine, provided you make some notes along the way. But you decide what those timings are, because clearly it will be dependent on the project speed or any changes that you do. And sometimes there might not be anything happening for a week or so, and then there'll be a series of activities. So again, it's what you decide. Now, the next slide is probably more important because this is the reassurance. And I've put don't panic because I don't want people to panic. This might seem like a large task or a mountain of work, but it is fairly straightforward. The key thing really is identifying the difficulty or the project nearer the start time, rather than thinking, well, we're not doing anything that's R&D at the moment, when actually you might be. It is fairly straightforward, and it's about adapting a new habit. And again, once you start doing this on a weekly basis, it becomes easy. It might be useful to hand this activity to one person in your organisation and give them the responsibility for it. We will be running training sessions for you and your team to show you how to do it and give you some ideas around how you can do it. But the other thing also is that you might have systems in place already that can be modified or adapted to collect people's time against a certain project, and the accounts system you use could have a few extra codes in it to identify resources that were spent on R&D materials or anything else that was bought. We are here to help and support you, and clearly if you need that, please contact us, but we will be sending out details of the training sessions in the next week or so. So in terms of action, what we'd like you to do is think about how you could implement a record keeping system. And this is something you will need to do. It's not something, well, we'll think about it in 3 months' time, because you need to be keeping the records now. And again, as memory fades, you'll probably think, you know, in 6 months' time, you won't remember all the things you did need to remember. One of the advantages here regarding keeping records is, in my experience, R&D claims improve in value when people keep better records. And that's because they don't forget what the involvement of people were and the materials that were used. And memories fade over time, as I'm sure you'll appreciate. And usually people's remembering of their time spent is usually less than it actually was. So think about how you're going to do it, who could be responsible for it, and what methods you could use. And now under the methods, you could use your existing management systems, your accounting system. It could even just be an Excel spreadsheet. It can be as simple as that. And then consider if you'd like to take part of the training when you receive our email and details of what's included and who you might like to send on it. But clearly don't delay on this. This is really important to protect your next claim. We at Fortis are here to help and support you. And if you've got any questions, please just write straight into any of the team on innovations, please. So just in summary, we've just covered the current situation in terms of how we used to do things and how those are changing in terms of the new legislation. We've got a digital submission process coming in from April the 1st of this year, which will demand that we keep better records around the R&D that people are doing. We've been through how that will affect you in as much as you've got to put something in place and how you might do that in terms of any actions. And also the fact that we're here to help and support you all along the way to ensure that you end up with a viable claim that we can support for you. And then the last thing is think about those actions and what you're going to do. And we'll send out some reminder emails along the way just to make sure that you haven't forgotten. So that ends the formal part of the webinar. And I hope that the information in there was of interest to everybody. We'll move on now to the questions and discussion. And I see we've got some coming in. Let me just. So we've got somebody here saying, is the R&D scheme going to end? It's not. Among all the civilized countries in the world, every country's got an R&D scheme. And what HMRC are trying to do is just to eliminate the amount of fraud that currently goes on and ensure that all R&D claims are in the correct scheme. That's RDEC or SME, and clearly meet the criteria for qualifying R&D. And that's our role as well in all of this, is to help and support you in that. So there's another question here. Where an international tendering process is needed for work and results in a non-UK appointment for R&D work, does this now become ineligible? If so, is this a recipe for inefficiency? Right. So if you've got a non-UK appointment, but they're paid from this country, I don't see that as a problem, because they're working abroad on behalf of the organisation. However, if they're a subcontractor, that might fall under HMR schemes for not being covered, but don't forget that doesn't come until next year. So it's that will fall under expenditure for 1st of April 2024. So we've still got some time if you need that to happen. But equally, this is on a case-by-case basis. So if you've got more specifics and you want to write in and just let us have those, we will be happy to answer those. No more questions. Any more? Just leave it for a minute. Okay. Nothing else coming in. We will follow up this with an email, and we've recorded the session as well, so you'll get a copy of that, and you'll also get some details around the training and other support that we'll be offering to all companies. So just expect to see that in your email over the next few weeks. I'd like to wish you thank you for taking part this afternoon, and wish you the best for the rest of the day. Thank you very much. Bye.